So what if my house wasn't perfect? It was perfect just the way it was. I realized that my determination to make things perfect meant I was chasing an empty obsession all day long. Nothing was ever going to be perfect the way I had envisioned in the past. Did I want to keep spending my energy on that effort, or did I want to step out of that obsession and enjoy my kids, maybe allowing myself to get messy right along with them in the process? I chose the latter, and that made all the difference. This revelation was so much more than a light bulb turning on in my head. I felt as if 100 pounds got lifted off my shoulders that afternoon. I remember sitting there on that sofa going, holy cow, I can breathe. It all came down to a mind shift in which I asked myself, what am I going for in life? Was it to achieve somebody else's idea of what a perfect home should look like? Or was it to live fully in the perfection of the home and family I have? My revelation wouldn't mean that I would never clean my house again. It wouldn't even keep me from throwing that slipcover in the washing machine eventually. My kids do tend to play better and act better in a clean environment, and Chip appreciates a clean home too. My family inspires me to want to keep our home clean for them, and I personally can't think straight in an environment that's too cluttered. And yet, the time I spend with my kids is worth far more than the time I spend cleaning. Right then and there, I made up my mind to stop cleaning the house during the day. If that meant I had to stay up an extra 45 minutes at night doing dishes or cleaning up the living room after the kids were in bed, then so be it. I also vowed to set up better storage systems and to teach the kids that everything had a place, but I wasn't going to obsess about any of that, not anymore. That day changed me. It really did. And I quickly found that my shift in mindset had a positive effect on our life together. Now when someone spills a glass of milk, I don't worry so much about the mess. Instead, I try to focus on my relationship with the one who spilled the milk. I still have my bad days, believe me. When I see that milk for the mess that it is and I yell, "Oh, come on," I get mad. I'm not perfect, but I recognize now that yelling is always the lesser of two options. The better option is to use that moment to teach them. Well, you know what? I did that when I was a kid too. We all make mistakes. Followed by, how about you help me clean this up? What I've found is that something as common as spilled milk can turn into a rich moment with my kids. And for years, my misguided perfectionism robbed both them and me of those moments. And I can't help but wonder how many other moments I robbed from my kids and from my husband while trying to attain some vision of a perfect home that I was never going to attain anyway. Before my slipcover revelation, I never allowed the kids to paint or do projects on my dining room table because it was my favorite table. Today, not only do I let them do their projects there, but I'm the one who instigates it. Okay, we're going to paint, kids. Why? Because I replaced that perfect table with the one that's all scuffed up and only gets better looking with age. I also tried to set aside various spots throughout the home where my kids were expected to make a mess. In the living room, on that table I just mentioned, I even carved out a spot in the kitchen where they could cook and have fun experimenting with food. That way I could be prepared, which means I wouldn't overreact. And that in turn meant my kids could be kids and I could be a better mom. It was all connected. The funny thing to me is that whenever we had people step foot into our house after that, they seemed more wowed by it than any other house I designed or lived in, including the 1920s dream house in Castle Heights. That got me thinking about the pressure we women and moms are all under these days. It seems as if the standards are so much higher than they were a few years ago, mainly because of what we see whenever we look on the internet. It used to require some effort to feel like an inferior mom and wife. A woman would have to go to a newsstand and spend $6 on a magazine to see the current societal standard of what my family and home are supposed to look like. Now it just shows up on social media everywhere you look, and it always seems to be picture perfect. That's all anyone seems to post, perfect pictures of perfect families enjoying perfect moments. Along with that, I think everyone's expectations of themselves have gotten so much higher. I mean, honestly, as a stay-at-home mom, every time I had a moment to open Facebook or Pinterest, I would walk away thinking, I'm not doing enough. And then I'd start second-guessing myself. I think that's what I started to overcome with those revelations in my own home. It's funny that these revelatory moments of mine happened on couches in two different homes, and I wonder why that is, but I don't have to wonder about the results of those moments. Shortly after I sat on the couch at the Castle Heights house and really noticed for the first time that I wasn't happy, even though I'd worked so hard to make everything look perfect, I had a conversation with a friend of mine. I was exhausted all the time, and I said to this friend, I feel like I'm just surviving at this point, and I'm not thriving. Once I was in the Carriage Square house and embracing the laughter and the messiness of my kids and not cleaning up all day long, I realized that it was up to me to flip that switch from surviving to thriving. It was just a mental shift, a readjustment in my way of thinking, like seeing my kids' fingerprint as kind of cute instead of a miserable mess. I actually made that particular mental shift after I had my Carriage Square revelation. It happened instantly, just like that, right after I made the decision to enjoy my kids instead of obsessing over making everything perfect. I looked down at those fingerprints, I was still on the couch, and suddenly they looked completely different. Then I got to thinking about the bigger picture. If I'm going to sit around and say I'm just surviving every day, well, guess what? When a big wave comes along suddenly, I won't be surviving. I'll be drowning. I mean, that's life. Life is never predictable. Life is never manageable. If your mindset is always, I'm just surviving, it seems to me that would wind up being your mindset for the rest of your life. You just get stuck in it. So I finally flipped the switch in my mind, and I said, I have to choose to thrive, even in the pain, even when it's tough. And it was tough. While I was coming to this conclusion, we were right in the middle of our whole financial mess. We'd managed to escape just under the wire through that God-given $100,000 check, but we were still in trouble. The miracle of that breakthrough moment for me is that I didn't really let our situation get to me. I didn't wallow in it. I didn't allow it to dictate my happiness. I was scared, sure, but for now at least, we had our house, we had our kids, we had our health, and we were living this beautiful life together. And I told myself, I want to make all that count in this season because otherwise it's just going to be a waste. I didn't want to look back at this experience and regret how I handled it. I wanted to say, win or lose, that we believed in love, that we had faith, and in essence, we fought the good fight. I didn't want to be found a quitter or a doubter. None of these things would have been helpful to Chip anyway. So even though I didn't feel it some days, and even though I shed my fair share of tears, I woke up every day and told myself, we can do this. God has not brought us this far to let us down now. And I would tell Chip, you've got this. Most guys would collapse under this pressure, but you were built for this.
We were still $100,000 short of the finish line.
Chip and I prayed together, a lot. We were doing well in our new house, the kids were happy, and we did our best to hide our problems from them, even as our stomachs clenched at the breakfast table, and we felt like breaking every time the mailman brought another stack of bills that we had absolutely no money left to pay. It wasn't just a matter of paying construction bills now. We were literally tapped out. In a few weeks' time, we would have nothing left to pay the electric bill and the mortgage on our home where we lived with our children. We were still working on some remodeling projects. In fact, I was doing the best work of my life, and we brought in some money through that work. But it wasn't nearly enough. So at that point, all of our praying led us to do something that felt completely radical to us.
I reached out to 2 friends of mine, and I'm using that term pretty loosely. These were people I didn't know real well. I'd worked with them a little bit here and there. They were fairly comfortable financially. Not rich by any means, but they were the type of people that might have a little bit of money in the bank and might be interested in earning a better return than the 1% that the banks were loaning at the time. I took these 2 guys to lunch, and as sick as I was on the inside and as much of a panic as I was in, I tried to keep the conversation all business. So look, I'm in a bit of a pickle, I explained. It's not bad news, like I'm in this huge bind or something, but we do have this development called Magnolia Villas underway, and we would really be interested in you 2 financing the completion of it. The bank has essentially capped us at an amount that was much lower than we had initially agreed on. I explained what the status of the development was and what we had done to raise the money so far. I've got all the work on the ground, but I still need $100,000 to get us across the finish line, I explained. I asked them for $50,000 each and laid out some terms on how quickly we believed we could pay each of them back with interest. It was a fair deal, and even though I'd kept it focused on the business aspects, I basically felt like I had spilled my guts to these 2 guys. One of them was completely silent, didn't say a word. The other guy, I don't know, man, sounds too risky to me. He asked a lot of questions and seemed really nervous about the deal in general. I've never had anybody react that way to a deal of mine, ever. It felt like a kick in the gut. In their defense, this was just not really what they did for a living. They were not angel investors or financial gurus. They were just good guys that I thought just might want to get into this deal with us. Long story short, they both walked away without much commitment and seemed generally uninterested. They were much better friends with each other than they were with me, and I hoped that maybe the one guy that was being silent would be able to be on my side and would convince his friend to not be so skeptical. I walked away feeling a little bit like Russell Crowe's character in that boxing movie Cinderella Man. I wonder if I was going to have to be that formerly proud man who had once been on the top of my profession and now had to wander around with all my cronies, asking hat in hand if I could borrow a few dollars just to buy my kids some milk.
We decided we'd better sit down and go over everything again. We went through the old invoices that were still unpaid and the new ones that had come in since we got the news, and we realized that we now had $100,000 in invoices sitting there. So even if those two men decided to make the investment, which at this point seemed very unlikely, all of that money was already spent, and we'd be back to falling behind again the very next month unless we could pre-sell some of the houses or encounter some other windfall.
A couple of very long days went by, and I finally got a call from the silent guy I had taken to lunch. He said, "Hey man, I really want to see the development. My wife and I want to meet you guys over there and maybe walk the properties, just get a better sense of exactly what you're talking about." So we met him over there on the site, and those two walked around just as calm as they could be. "This is beautiful," they said. "Wow, this is awesome," they said. "Wow, I was hoping you'd think that. So what are you guys wanting to do? Why'd you want to come walk the site?" "I know that meeting was a bit rough the other day," he said. "I just want you to know that I've never done this kind of thing before. But when you were talking, you were really speaking my language. I admire how hard you've fought to keep this project alive and make sure that everyone gets paid. And I was actually eager to help out. But I wasn't sure if it was just my heart talking, you know? So I went back and I told my wife about it, and we prayed about this. And well, we've decided that we're going to give you $100,000. I reminded him that I only felt comfortable with the $50,000 investment so that we could spread the risk out. "I know, but we prayed about it, and we just feel that this is the right thing to do. You're going to do great here. We need this kind of development in Waco, and we have no doubt you're going to sell all of these houses, and it will make a big difference to a lot of people. And if you don't, well, as I said, we've prayed about this, so we don't want you to worry even if you never pay us back. We've already imagined that. So if this doesn't work out like you hoped, just don't worry about it. We're already over it. We don't want this to be a bit awkward as far as our relationship is concerned."
My knees almost gave out. It took everything in me not to break down right then and there. This wasn't like a best friend who would bend over backwards to bail you out of trouble. They were just acquaintances at the time. So for them to say something like that came as a complete shock. They had that $100,000 check with them, and they handed it to us right then and there. The two of us went home in absolute awe of what had just happened. Then we sat down and considered how best to use that money. There were a number of invoices that were due in 2 days, but for a moment we wondered if maybe we should invest the money in a quick flip house, something that might turn that money into $150,000 and give us some leeway to pay other bills. But that would mean putting some people off by 30 days or more, and that just didn't feel right to us. So what did we do? We both looked at each other and said, "Give it away."
We didn't mean give it away in the sense of philanthropy, but in recognizing that this money wasn't ours, it was owed to others. So we sat down and wrote out $100,000 worth of checks. We were completely broke again within a week, but everybody got paid. Every bill was up to date. With that check, we were able to buy ourselves another month or so of time to get back on our feet. It's sad looking back, because even with that miracle, we still had our doubts.
We both realized quickly thereafter that this was no fluke. It had been the story of our life together ever since we'd met. From the very beginning, I feel like we had encountered miracle after miracle that allowed us to get by and survive. Now it was happening on a much bigger scale, in $100,000 increments. But maybe we should have been paying more attention to those little miracles all along. We were now both out on a limb, and we looked up and saw God right there with us.
Somehow we were always wily enough to get ourselves out of a financial pickle by finding the money from somewhere. Or so we thought. But this was not being wily. This couldn't be anything but the grace of God. Did those earlier breaks come from the same source? Getting that $100,000 check made us open our eyes and see that whenever we'd needed a break, when a house would sell or rent would come through just in the nick of time, God was there orchestrating. We were just so overwhelmed by all of this.
Maybe getting to the bottom all those times, and especially that time, was some sort of a test. A test of will, maybe, a test of faith, a test of our resolve to stay the course and following our dreams and to do the right thing when it came down to how we treated others. I don't know. What I do know, looking back on it now, is that all of these big, life-changing things were right around the corner for us at that moment. And if we had given up, if we had walked away, if we had crumbled when we were at our lowest,